Hello. In this presentation, I'd like to talk about how life cycle thinking finds itself into life cycle management and how we create more sustainable products. So, what do we mean by more sustainable products? We often hear about green marketing, that this magic product or this magic snake oil can create a greener, more environmentally friendly, healthier you and a better planet for everyone. Is that really true, and how do we understand the ramifications and impacts of different products and processes? In order to truly understand that, we need to take a life cycle approach to understanding the impacts of different products and processes, as we've discussed previously. So, as we begin life cycle thinking, we want to think about the traditional manufacturing processes, but we want to expand that scope as well and think about the producers from cradle to grave and the impacts on marketing and communication as well. So we not only include the entire process, but also different stakeholders in the process. The main goal of life cycle thinking is to reduce resource use and emissions from or to the environment, as well as to improve the social performance in various stages of a product's life cycle. In this way, companies can achieve cleaner products and processes, a competitive advantage in the marketplace, and an improved platform to meet the needs of a changing business climate. Life cycle thinking is somewhat related to pollution prevention, but goes beyond pollution prevention. If you don't have as much gray hair as me, you might not recall pollution prevention was a big deal in the 1990s in order to try and reduce material use, consumption, and waste. Now we need to think about going beyond that into not just those processes, but looking upstream at the extraction and raw material process, as well as disposal, which traditionally was not included in what had previously been called pollution and prevention. So when we do life cycle thinking, we might think about the 6RE philosophy, or rethink the product and its functions. The product can be used more efficiently, reducing the use of energy and other natural resources. How can we reduce energy and material consumption through a product's life cycle? Is it possible to replace harmful substances with more environmentally friendly alternatives? Can the materials that we use be recycled so that we can build products from disassembly and provide easier recycling? Or can the product be reused, either parts or the product in whole? And lastly, can we repair the product so that it doesn't need to be disposed of and we can consume less materials by creating less new products? So if we concern ourselves with life cycle management, we would define life cycle management as the application of the ideas of life cycle thinking and analysis to modern business practices, with the aim to manage the total life cycle of an organization's product and processes towards a more sustainable consumption and production model. Life cycle management isn't just a single approach or methodology, although we'll be focused in this chapter mostly on life cycle analysis, but it may include the environmental, economic, and social aspects of products, processes, and organizations. Oftentimes, the social aspects are most difficult to quantify. Right now, life cycle management is voluntary and is largely governed or compared from one process to another through the various ISO 14000 standards mentioned previously. So, as we think about what our objectives are, our overall objectives throughout ENGR 411 and 412 is to create more sustainable products, processes, or organizations. In order to do this, we have to include life cycle thinking in the process, and some ways to think about life cycle thinking is to include things like corporate social responsibility, pollution prevention processes, and product and supply chain management, thinking more cradle to grave. There are systems and constraints and policies for this that can be found in various ISO methods and other systems of policies, regulations, and data control. And we use various tools to do this, many of which were discussed in ENGR 411 for specific environmental impact tools. And now we've gone on to broader multidimensional tools like life cycle analysis, but these things can include cleaner production, eco-design, environmental management, and life cycle costing. As we do life cycle thinking, this often requires that the company or organization we're working with thinks beyond its existing boundaries. In other words, oftentimes the company that's producing an automobile is a very different organization and company than the one that's extracting the raw material for the aluminum and steel. So in order to do that, we must cross organizational boundaries to consider the product life cycle, the market, and in order to communicate the product life cycle issues to the ultimate user as well. We try and incorporate life cycle analysis and thinking in the design process, as the design typically determines 70 to 80% of the total product life cycle cost and impacts. Early assessment, particularly of the cradle to grave environmental aspects, often leads to the greatest good. We might think about the eco-design approach in this way, that it involves the product or system definition, some environmental assessment, and the environmental assessment can consider a life cycle perspective, but also the stakeholders' perspective. Those things can be incorporated into a more ecological design, and that's only completed if we communicate the benefits of that ecological design through environmental communications to the end user. From a life cycle perspective, we'd use environmental life cycle assessments and life cycle thinking to define the environmental aspects and environmental impacts caused by the product. The stakeholder may also need to be aware of legal requirements, market demands, and the competitor's products as well. In the eco-design stage, we would want to link to significant environmental parameters to environmental strategies to reduce environmental impacts, making sure that those strategies provide a product that works and lowers environmental impacts. Finally, as part of the eco-design stage, we need to be able to generate ideas that realize the function of the product, generate various ideas that can produce the same functionality with lower environmental impacts, and be able to define and describe the economic, technical, social, and environmental impacts of the decisions made in the design process. The output from this should be a way to effectively communicate the environmental aspects and impacts associated with choices in design to the marketplace, both the producers, the designers, and the end users of that product or process, or people within that organization. Some typical ways to do this might include things like informational brochures that describe the product life cycle and the environmental issues associated with those, and you may have seen these in various marketing campaigns. Other types of analysis include different types of branding. These would be things like the EcoStar branding or the EcoLeaf brand label that might describe, in this EcoLeaf image here, how Panasonic's products relate to greenhouse gas factors and resource consumption factors. So those factors can be distributed through life cycle analysis for designers and marketers and production people through the use, distribution, product manufacturing, material use and manufacturing, and ultimate disposable and recyclability of those products for various scores to understand how a product fits within an ecological framework. The integration of life cycle thinking with relevant design processes should include things like the life cycle assessment, which may be simplified, or a detailed life cycle assessment depending upon the needs of the customer. The results of the life cycle thinking analysis or life cycle assessment should be usable for different functions, including research and development of the product, sales, marketing, management, and communication. And finally, effective life cycle assessment and analysis involves that communication piece, not just to the product and the designers within the company, but should include language that's able to communicate the message of sustainability to a more general audience. Why do we do this, and how do we do this?